Hey guys, what's up? Booksmarts here, and today we're doing another Zero to Hero guide. This guide is for the Assassination Rogue, and we'll be taking a look at talents, gear, stat prio, rotations, and playstyle for single target raid encounters, cleave raid encounters, and Mythic Plus. First up is talents. Assassination Rogues have access to two hero talent trees, Deathstalker and Fatebound. At the moment, Deathstalker is stronger both in Raid and Mythic Plus situations, provided the Mythic Plus dungeons are higher than a 2, so we'll be using this Deathstalker build as the default for every situation. For single target raid fights, namely Sikrin and Kaiveza, you'll want to run with this build on screen. On the class tree side, we go for Supercharger and Forced Induction for the increased single target, and on the spec tree side, we foregone all the AoE talents and picked up Arterial Precision for the extra bleed damage thanks to Shiv. A very strong, synergistic talent tree that focuses on putting out massive single target damage. For raid encounters involving more than one target, the talent changes are actually quite small. On the class tree side, everything stays the same. On the spec tree side, we remove points from Improved Garrote and Master Assassin and put them into Throne Precision and Crimson Tempest. This gives us enough AoE to make a difference while still giving us strong single target damage. For Mythic Plus talents, both sides of the tree make quite a few changes. On the class tree side, we remove the point from Forced Induction and the 2 points from Supercharger to go for Subterfuge and Without a Trace. Subterfuge in particular, when combined with Master Assassin, gives us tons of time in multi-target situations to set up our bleeds, which is really helpful. On the spec tree side, we drop Serrated Bone Spikes and remove all the points from Systemic Failure down to Arterial Precision and use all those talent points to buff our AoE bleeds by a massive margin. We lose a small amount of single target damage, but gain an insane amount of AoE. Moving on to gear and stat prio. On screen now is a breakdown of stat weights for Raid and Mythic Plus. The main point of gear is to buff our stats, and the stats we're looking for on an Assassination Rogue are Crit and Mastery, and tons of it. Since our bleed ticks give us energy back, we really only need more energy, and as such more haste, in single target situations, where we can only apply one set of bleeds. And while versatility is a valuable stat, it does not compare to the value of crit and mastery. Agility provides more weight than secondaries, so item level is generally king, but you always want to sim your character to figure out what the best items and upgrades for your character are. Since we're talking about stat weights, I'll say this as well. Main hand weapon damage is far more important than any other stat weight, and offhand weapon damage is far less important than any other stat weight. So, when you're gearing, make sure to get a good main hand weapon as soon as possible. This season, our gear choices are pretty easy due to the power of some of the non-tier pieces, namely the neck from Sikrin, the ring from Queen, and the back from Rationin. There are also quite a few trinkets this season, some boasting crazy stat gains, while others do massive upfront damage. As Assassination Rogues, we have a couple different options for best trinkets. For passive trinkets, we have Empowering Crystal of Anubarak, a nice passive stat trinket that also gives us some main stat, and it's our best passive trinket from dungeons. Our best active trinket from dungeons is Skardan's Grace, which gives us a massive mastery buff for 20 seconds every 2 minutes. Our best passive trinket from Raid is Alvanax's Mercurial Egg, which either gives us main stat when we sit still, or our highest secondary stat when we're moving, and our best active trinket from Raid is Treacherous Transmitter, also a 2-minute cooldown, but giving a ridiculous amount of agility. At this time, I'd recommend Skardan's Grace all the time, Treacherous Transmitter for single target, and Alvanax's Egg for AoE. Shown on screen now is a preview of the best in slot for an Assassination Rogue, in single target and AoE, provided no items are crafted. Speaking of crafted items, let's talk about that for a minute. Craftable items have been made some of the most powerful items in the game, and combined with the right embellishments, can actually become stronger than our best options, depending on what item you craft. For Assassination Rogues, main hand weapon damage is insanely important, so if you don't have a 639 weapon that you can use, your best first option is a 636 crafted weapon with the Darkmoon Sigil Ascension embellishment. Your second crafted item should be for your waist slot, the rune branded waistband with the Writhing Armor banding embellishment. Once you acquire a 639 weapon, your third crafted item should be your wrists, the rune branded armbands. And when you do get a 639 weapon and swap to 2 crafted armor pieces, both of your embellishments should also swap to 2 dusk thread linings. And since we're talking about embellishments, we'll also touch on gems, enchants, and consumables. Shown on screen now are the recommended enchants, consumables, and gems for an Assassination Rogue. Feel free to pause here while you get your information, and we're moving on. Moving on to the playstyle and rotation. Assassination rogues are all about doing damage to their target through poisons and bleeds. Rogues in general are the only class with baseline poisons for their weapons, and Assassination unlocks the true potential of those poisons. They also feel like a very cooldown-centric class, and when I say cooldown-centric, I mean that they have a moment where they're in their cooldown window and they're pumping and everything's coming together, and then when they're out of the cooldown window, they're just kinda hanging out, keeping things going and waiting on the next set of cooldowns. And I think this is derived mainly from a very simple rotation with many factors to take into consideration during the cooldown window. So let's break that down. We'll start with the basics, then build from there. Rogues use energy for their resource, and their gameplay revolves around using combo points. At the most basic level, you mutilate to build combo points, and you envenom to dump them. Mutilate is your bread and butter combo point generator, and envenom is your bread and butter combo point spender. Both abilities mainly focus on just flat damage, but envenom has the added benefit of giving us a 30% increased poison application chance, and the more points we spend, the longer the chance. Recently, another change was made to rogues, where envenom now gives us 3 seconds of slice and dice per combo point spent. Slice and dice is another one of our finishers, but instead of doing damage, it gives us a buff that increases our attack speed by 50%. This was a very important ability for rogues, as more attack speed means more chances to poison the target, but now that envenom also gives us slice and dice for free, we shouldn't ever have to press slice and dice as part of our normal rotation. A couple parts of our normal rotation that we haven't mentioned yet are our bleeds, Garrote and Rupture. Garrote is our main bleed ability, doing damage over time, and with talents it'll also silence the target for 5 seconds whenever you use it. And Rupture is our bleed finisher. Does a whole bunch of damage over a whole bunch of time. One thing about Assassin Rogues, we get energy back whenever one of our bleeds deals damage, so you want to make sure both of these bleeds are on as many targets as possible for as long as possible. Rogues are also sneaky creatures, with a whole host of abilities available to them only through stealth, but there's only one stealth ability that's vital to your normal rotation, and that's Ambush. Ambush is only usable while in stealth, and is kind of like an upgraded Mutilate, doing more damage and generating more combo points. It's really strong, and if you have Ambush available, there's almost never a reason not to press it. So far, all the abilities mentioned have mainly been for single target, but Rogue has some crazy AoE potential too, with Fan of Knives and Crimson Tempest. Fan of Knives is our AoE combo point generator, just throwing knives out in a circle around us to deal damage and apply poisons. It says generates 1 combo point, but the more targets you hit, the more combo points you get. And Crimson Tempest is our AoE combo point spender. It puts a bleed on all targets around us, similar to Rupture, but for AoE. One extra thing about Crimson Tempest, the more people you have it on, the more damage it does. So in AoE situations, it has the potential to do really good damage. So, our normal rotations is literally just keeping all of our dots on the target, then mutilating to get as many envenoms as possible off. And that's it, that's the basic of Assassination Rogue. From here, we'll talk about things you have to factor in, the first being Thistle Tea. Thistle Tea has 3 stacks on a 1-minute cooldown, gives us energy, and increases our mastery by a bit. The mastery buff means that we want to make sure we consume a charge during each of our cooldown windows. But a change was made with the recent anniversary patch, where if you're ever below 30 energy, a stack of Thistle Tea is automatically consumed. Consequently, we want to pay attention and make sure that we always have at least 1 stack of Thistle Tea for our cooldowns. The way I do this is by never using an ability with less than 80 energy, and never using Mutilate when I have less than 100 energy outside of my cooldown windows. This causes me to always have at least 1 stack ready for when I need it, and allows me to virtually have unlimited energy during my cooldown windows. The next things we'll talk about are your cooldowns, Kingsbane and Deathmark. Deathmark is a 2-minute cooldown that puts a dot on the target and duplicates your Garrote, Rupture, and all your lethal poisons on the target for 16 seconds. Super strong cooldown, and you want to use it as often as possible. The other one is Kingsbane. Kingsbane is on a 1-minute cooldown, and it puts a 14-second dot on your target, and it gets stronger every time you apply a lethal poison to the target. On top of that, it also counts as a lethal poison, which means it gets duplicated by Deathmark. So to work these into the rotation, just have your Garrote and Rupture on the target, have Slice and Dice going, then either Kingsbane or Deathmark into Kingsbane if you have Deathmark. One note here, Kingsbane is on a 1-minute cooldown and Deathmark's on a 2-minute cooldown, so these should always line up. If they don't, I would delay your Deathmark until your Kingsbane will be up on the next GCD. From here, Ignore the energy limit we put on ourselves and get as many Envenoms off in your cooldown window as possible. Now we said earlier that Kingsbane is a dotted stack, so it gets stronger near the end of its tick time. With that being said, you want to consume a Thistle Tea when Kingsbane has 6 seconds left on the target, so those final couple ticks benefit from that extra mastery. The next ability for us to factor in is Shiv. Shiv isn't normally in the main rotation, but because of our talent, Arterial Precision, it's very useful at certain points. With this talent, whenever we use Shiv, our bleeds are 30% stronger for 8 seconds, and our cooldowns are 14 and 16 seconds. So, if we have one Shiv available, we Shiv when Kingsbane has 7 or 8 seconds left, and if we have 2 charges of Shiv, we Shiv between Deathmark and Kingsbane, and then Shiv again when Kingsbane has 8 seconds left. Another thing we'll have to factor in is Vanish, and it's actually pretty easy. In single target, if we have improved Garrote, then we want to Vanish right after using Kingsbane so we can refresh Garrote with an improved Garrote for more damage. And in Mythic Plus situations, Vanish can be used to refresh your Garrotes and Ruptures thanks to the Indiscriminate Carnage talent. We also take 2 Vanishes in Mythic Plus, which allows us to Vanish in situations where we're beginning another pull, but we either haven't had time or weren't given an opportunity to go back into Stealth, which helps guarantee we make use of our hero talent in every pull. The last thing for us to factor in is our hero talent minigame, Deathstalker's Mark and Endless Night. This is a cycle of where ambushing a target puts 3 marks on them, and using finishers with 5 or more combo points uses up a mark to do damage. When we use up all 3 marks, our next 7-point Envenom does more damage and applies 3 more marks, as well as making our next Fan of Knives hit harder. This means we always want to start combat with an ambush so we can get our marks, and we want to choose the highest HP target to cleave off of in most AoE situations, because having to reapply our marks is only doable by vanishing and ambushing. So, we understand the basic rotation, we understand when and how to use our cooldowns, time for the openers. For single target raid openers, we make sure we're in stealth, then the opener is ambush into Garrote. From here, if we have 5 or more combo points, we rupture. If we have less than 5 combo points, we mutilate or ambush into rupture. After rupture, we build up combo points for Envenom for the extra poison application chance. After the Envenom, we can go right into Deathmark and to Shiv if we have 2 charges. If we don't have 2 charges, then we go Deathmark into Kingsbane, then Vanish mid GCD for the improved Garrote. Get as much damage as you can out, and once Kingsbane has 8 seconds left, we Shiv into Mutilate into Thistle Tea, then finish out the Kingsbane and Deathmark dots. And after that, we're just maintaining Garrote and Rupture and waiting on the next set of cooldowns. For Mythic Plus, we have a different set of talents, so boss openers look a little different. The main changes are that in Mythic Plus, you only have access to 1 Shiv, so you'll only be using Shiv for the last 8 seconds of every Kingsbane. You can technically use it on cooldown since it's a 30-second cooldown, but if it gets delayed by even 1 GCD, it'll throw off your entire cooldown window. So unless you're perfect, I'd recommend only using it during the cooldown window. In Mythic Plus, we also have a second Vanish and improved Garrote plus Indiscriminate Carnage. So we'll want a Kingsbane into Vanish into Garrote so we can have an improved Garrote for the entirety of Kingsbane. We still pump damage for 6 seconds and Shiv into Mutilate into Thistle Tea when Kingsbane has 8 seconds left. The last note I would make for Mythic Plus bosses is the Mythic Plus talent tree takes Caustic Spatter as well. And this talent makes 40% of poison damage dealt to your target splash onto nearby enemies, and it gets applied whenever you mutilate a target that has Rupture and Deadly Poison. Against a boss, you should be using Mutilate often enough that it stays up permanently, but just make sure it doesn't fall off. Against trash packs in Mythic Plus, our rotation's actually really simple, but also kinda complex. We make sure we're in stealth so we can ambush the highest HP target into Garrote. If there are 4 more targets, we Garrote twice, which spreads it to a 4th and 5th nearby target. And regardless of how many times we need to press Garrote to spread it around to mobs, once we hit 5 or more combo points, we Rupture. With our Mythic Plus talent build, we've got 12 seconds to spread Garrotes and Ruptures around to all the targets, so we want to make use of that. Once we have Garrote and Rupture applied to all targets, we choose the highest HP mob, Mutilate to apply Caustic Spatter, and then it's all about maintenance from there. We get energy from each of our Garrotes and Ruptures thanks to the Venomous Wounds talent, so we want to make sure we always have enough of them out to be gaining more energy than we're using. And Crimson Tempest as well does an insane amount of damage in AoE, so we want to make sure we keep that up. we keep track of Caustic Spatter and use Mutilate to keep that up. And once we're able to keep up our Garrotes, Ruptures, and Crimson Tempest dots and our Caustic Spatter buff, the rest of our rotation is using Phantom Knives to build combo points and Envenom to dump them. Our cooldown window is the exact same, just substituting Mutilate for Phantom Knives as long as you're able to keep up Caustic Spatter. In AoE, Caustic Spatter is going to be responsible for a huge chunk of your damage, so do not forget it. So, for the AoE opener, such as the first pull of a dungeon, the opener would be to stealth beforehand, into ambush, into garrote, into rupture, into mutilate for caustic spatter, into garrote, into rupture, you see how we're spreading the garrotes and the ruptures around, into phantom knives, into crimson tempest, into deathmark and kingsbane. From here, we phantom knives or envenom until kingsbane has 8 seconds, then shiv into mutilate, into thistle tea, finish out the Kingsbane and Deathmark dots, and then it's the normal AoE rotation until cooldowns come back. Now that we understand the full rotation, I wanted to mention one other thing about our trinkets. WoW mainly has 2 types of trinkets, right? Stat increase trinkets and damage trinkets. Where stat increase trinkets increase 1 or more stats for a certain amount of time, whereas damage trinkets just do a bunch of damage, whether at once or over time. If it's a stat increase trinket, you want to use it along with any potions or racial buffs at the same time you use Deathmark. And if it's a damage trinket, you want to use it as soon as your Deathmark dot falls off, regardless of whether or not the damage trinket's a dot. The last thing I want to talk about are some helpful weak ores. In my time playing an Assassination Rogue, keeping track of my bleeds, my energy, and my cooldown timers have helped me to get the most out of my rogue, and I would highly recommend getting some weak ores to help you track whatever aspects of the spec you might find it hard to keep track of. And that is my Zero to Hero Assassination Rogue Guide. With your newfound knowledge and skill, you should be able to take your rogue into raid and keys and smash like never before. If you enjoyed the guide, please subscribe or smash that like button, and feel free to leave a comment telling me what class or spec you want to see a guide for next. Alright everyone, I'm out. Take care.